I never thought I'd end up here, sitting at my kitchen table staring at a cold cup of coffee and wondering how everything in my life got so out of control. When I married Grant, I thought I was finally stepping into the life I'd always wanted. Stability, a family, a chance to feel grounded. But that's not what happened. Instead, I found myself fading, shrinking into the background of my own home. Grant's a good man, or at least, that's what I used to tell myself. He works hard, pays the bills, makes sure we have everything we need. But somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling like I was part of that we. I can't even remember the last time he really looked at me. I mean, really looked. Like he saw me as more than just someone who cooks his dinners and folds his laundry. At first, I told myself it was just life. Work, stress, the routine of marriage. But the longer it went on, the harder it was to ignore the truth. I felt invisible. And the worst part? I was starting to get used to it. It wasn't just Grant and me, though. There were his boys, Devon and Zaden. His kids from his first marriage. Devon's the older one, 22 and the kind of guy who knows exactly how to get what he wants. He's confident, charming, and so easy to talk to. Too easy. Zaden's different. 18, quieter but sharp. He's the type who notices things other people miss. Sometimes I think he sees more than he lets on. I tried to be the cool stepmom, friendly, supportive, but not overbearing. And for the most part, it worked. At least I thought it did. Devon, though, he was always different with me. The way he joked, the way he smiled. It felt harmless at first. Just teasing, just playful. But it didn't stay that way. I know how it sounds. Believe me, I know. But when someone makes you feel seen again after years of being ignored, it's hard to pull away. It wasn't planned. It wasn't something I set out to do. It just happened. Devon started paying attention to me in ways Grant never did. He noticed when I changed my hair, complimented me when I wore something new, asked questions about my day and actually listened to the answers. And I ate it up. Every single word. It wasn't just the attention, though. It was the way he looked at me, like I was someone worth looking at, like I was someone he wanted. The first time we kissed, I told myself it was a mistake, that I'd never let it happen again. But that was a lie. And deep down, I think I knew it even then. I should have stopped it. I know that. But I didn't. And the more time we spent alone, the harder it became to resist. One night after Grant had gone to bed, Devon and I ended up in the living room. It was late, too late, and before I knew it, we were on the couch, and his hands were on me and God, I can't even think about it without my stomach twisting, not because I regret it, but because of how much I didn't. Because of how alive it made me feel. I thought we were careful. I thought we'd never get caught. But then there was Zaden. Zaden was home that night. He didn't see anything. Not then, anyway, but I think he heard us. He didn't say anything, but the way he looked at me afterward, I should have known that look meant trouble. I told myself it was just my imagination, that he didn't know anything, that we were safe. But I was wrong. So wrong. It started so small. Little things that felt harmless in the moment. A lingering glance, a touch that lasted a second too long. At first, I didn't even recognize it for what it was. I told myself Devon was just being friendly. Maybe a little flirty, but that's how he was with everyone. Except, it didn't feel that way. Not with me. It was the way he looked at me like I was something he wanted but wasn't supposed to have. I should have shut it down right away. I should have told him to stop before it turned into something we couldn't take back. But I didn't. I remember the night it all fell apart. Grant and I had one of our usual fights, if you can even call them fights. He didn't yell, he didn't slam doors, he just shut down. I stood there trying to get through to him, but it was like talking to a wall. Nothing I said mattered. Nothing ever did. By the time he left the house, off to some work thing, or at least that's what he said, I felt like I was coming apart at the seams. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. And that's when Devon walked in. He took one look at me and knew something was wrong. I guess it wasn't hard to tell. I must have looked as broken as I felt. "What happened?" he asked, and his voice was so soft, so careful. I tried to brush him off, but he didn't let it go. He sat down next to me close enough that I could feel the heat coming off his skin. And when he put his hand on my knee, I didn't move away. I told him everything. I told him how lonely I felt, how invisible, how Grant made me feel like I was nothing more than a piece of furniture in my own home. And Devon listened, really listened. He didn't try to fix it or brush it off. He didn't tell me I was overreacting or being dramatic. He just sat there and let me talk until I couldn't talk anymore. And then he touched my face. I should have pulled back. I should have told him to stop, but I didn't. Instead, I leaned into him. I let him kiss me. And when he did, I didn't feel invisible anymore. That night changed everything. Afterward, I couldn't look at him without remembering the feel of his hands on me, the weight of his body. I wanted to hate myself for it, for how much I wanted more. But I didn't. I couldn't. It wasn't just the physical part, though God knows that was part of it. It was how he made me feel. Wanted. Desired. Alive. But the guilt? That came too. Every time I was alone with Grant, it gnawed at me. The lies, the secrets. I'd sit across from him at the dinner table and wonder if he could see it written all over my face, if he could smell Devon on my skin. And then there was Zaden. I don't know if it was paranoia or if he really did start watching me more closely after that first night. Either way, I felt it. The weight of his eyes, always lingering just a little too long, like he knew something wasn't right but couldn't figure out what. Devon and I tried to be careful. We planned everything, when and where we could be alone. We made excuses, covered our tracks, but the risk never went away. That was part of what made it so addictive, the danger, the fear of getting caught. It made every moment with him feel sharper, more intense. But no matter how careful we were, there was always that voice in the back of my head whispering that it was only a matter of time before it all came crashing down. I still don't know how we let our guard down that much. Maybe it was arrogance, maybe it was desperation, or maybe we just got careless. Whatever it was, it almost ruined everything. Grant was out of town again. Another work trip, another long weekend of pretending I didn't feel completely alone. Devon was supposed to be at a friend's place, and Zaden had told us he'd be out late with some of his classmates. The house felt empty, and for once I let myself relax. Devon didn't waste any time. The second the door closed behind Zaden, he was all over me. I should have told him to wait, but I didn't. I couldn't. We started in the living room. I remember the way Devon's hands gripped my waist, pulling me onto his lap. I remember the heat of his mouth on my neck, the way my skin prickled under his touch. It was reckless, and we both knew it. But in that moment, it didn't matter. He kissed me like he couldn't get enough, and I kissed him back just as hard. My head was spinning, my heart was racing, and then the sound of the front door opening. It felt like the floor dropped out from under me. Devon froze. For a second, we just stared at each other, wide-eyed and breathless. Zaden's voice echoed from the entryway. "Hello?" I shot up so fast I almost fell. Devon scrambled to fix his shirt while I tried to smooth my hair and steady my breathing. My legs felt like they were made of jelly, but somehow I managed to stand. "We can't be here," I whispered. My voice was shaking. "Go to your room. Now." Devon didn't argue. He slipped down the hall just as Zaden stepped into the living room. I tried to act casual, leaning against the back of the couch like I hadn't just been moments away from losing everything. "Hey," I said, forcing a smile. "You're home early." Zaden's eyes swept the room. I saw the flicker of suspicion before he shrugged and dropped his bag on the floor. Plans changed. His tone was flat, but something about the way he said it made my stomach tighten. The next few minutes felt like hours. I made small talk, asking him about school, about his friends, anything to keep him distracted. But the whole time, I couldn't stop thinking about Devon in the next room. I thought about the way the air still smelled like his cologne, the way my skin still felt warm from his touch, and I kept waiting, praying that Zaden wouldn't notice. But then he looked at me, really looked at me, and I swear, in that moment, he knew. He didn't say anything, though. Not then. He just nodded and headed upstairs, leaving me standing there with my heart pounding so hard it hurt. When Devon finally came out of his room, the first thing he said was, "We can't do this here again." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe we'd be smarter, that we'd stop taking risks. But the way he looked at me, the way I looked back, I already knew it wasn't true. I couldn't stay away from him, no matter how much I wanted to, and that scared me more than anything. By the way, if you've made it this far into the story, thank you for sticking with me. I know it's not an easy thing to hear, and I appreciate you listening. If you're finding this video interesting, or if you think there's someone who could relate to what I'm sharing, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps me keep sharing stories like this and lets me know I'm not alone out here. All right, let's get back to it. I don't think I'll ever forget that day. It was supposed to be safe. Grant was working late and Zaden had plans after school. Devon and I thought we had the house to ourselves. We didn't even bother locking the door. Stupid. So stupid. It started like all the other times. Fast, desperate, like we couldn't get enough of each other. Devon pulled me into his room, his hands all over me before the door even closed. I didn't stop him. I didn't want to stop him. I wasn't thinking about what could go wrong. I wasn't thinking at all. I was on top of him, breathless, my hands gripping his shoulders. Devon's eyes were locked on mine, and for those few minutes, the rest of the world didn't exist. Until it did. The sound of a door creaking open snapped me out of it. I froze. Devon's eyes went wide, but before either of us could move, Zaden's voice cut through the air. "What the hell?" My head whipped toward the door, and there he was, Zaden, standing there with his phone in his hand and this look on his face. Shock, disgust, but also something else, something darker. I scrambled off Devon, yanking the sheets around me as panic surged through my veins. My mouth opened, but no words came out. Zaden just stood there staring. "Zaden, wait, just..." I stumbled over my words, reaching out like I could somehow erase what he'd just seen. But he didn't move. He didn't leave. Devon started swearing under his breath, pulling on his clothes as fast as he could. I was still sitting there, completely exposed, completely vulnerable, when Zaden held up his phone. "I got it all," he said. His voice was calm, too calm. "So, unless you want Dad to see this, we need to talk." My stomach dropped. My entire body went cold. I couldn't breathe. "Zaden, please, don't do this." "Don't do what?" He tilted his head like he was enjoying this. "Tell Dad the truth? Show him what his wife and son have been doing behind his back?" "No," I said quickly. "You can't. Please, you can't tell him." I was begging. I didn't care. All I could think about was what would happen if Grant saw that video. My marriage, my home, my entire life, it would all be gone. But Zaden just stared at me, and then he smiled. "Maybe I don't have to," he said. "Maybe we can work something out." My chest tightened. I already knew what was coming, but I still asked. "What do you want?" He didn't even hesitate. He stepped closer, lowering his voice like Devon wasn't still sitting there. "I want what he gets," Zaden said, nodding at his brother. "And if you give it to me, I'll keep my mouth shut." I felt like I was going to be sick. I shook my head. "No, I can't do that." "Okay," Zaden said. He started to turn, his finger hovering over the screen of his phone. "I guess Dad's gonna find out then." "Wait!" The word came out before I could stop it. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't even know what I was saying. All I knew was that I couldn't let Grant see that video. I couldn't let my entire life fall apart. Just give me a second," I said, my voice shaking. "Let me think." "What's there to think about?" Zaden asked. "You either do what I want, or I tell Dad everything. It's that simple." I looked at Devon, but he didn't say a word. He just sat there, staring at the floor like he couldn't even look at me. I was completely alone. My head was spinning. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, but what would that fix? Nothing. So I did the only thing I could think of. Fine, I whispered. Just not here. Not now. When? Zaden asked, his lips curling into a smirk. Later, I said. Tonight. Good, Zaden said. Then I guess this stays between us. He left after that, leaving me and Devon sitting there in complete silence. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. But more than anything, I wanted to turn back time and undo everything that had led to this moment. Instead, I just sat there, knowing it was too late for that, knowing this was only the beginning. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed next to Grant, staring at the ceiling while his steady breaths filled the room. He had no idea. No idea that his wife was falling apart. No idea that his son was holding her life in his hands. I kept replaying Zaden's words over and over again. The smirk on his face burned into my memory. I wanted to believe I could find a way out, that maybe he'd change his mind or just delete the video. But I knew better. He had me exactly where he wanted, and he wasn't going to let go. When Grant finally left for work the next morning, I felt like I couldn't breathe. I was running out of time, and when Zaden came downstairs, I knew there was no escaping it. You ready? His voice was casual, like he wasn't about to ruin my life, like this was just some game he was playing, and I was the prize he'd already won. I tried to act strong. I told him I couldn't do it, that it was wrong, that he was out of his mind. But he didn't even flinch. You don't have a choice, Mia. And he was right. I didn't. We ended up in his room. The door closed behind us and the sound of the lock clicking made my stomach turn. I stood there frozen while he leaned against the bed and looked me up and down. My skin burned under his gaze, and for the first time I felt truly powerless. Take it off, he said, motioning to my shirt. My hands shook as I reached for the buttons. I tried not to cry. I told myself to just get through it, to keep my head down and do what he wanted so it would be over as quickly as possible. But the second my shirt hit the floor, I saw the way his eyes darkened, and I knew this wasn't going to be quick or easy. Zaden didn't just want my body, he wanted control. And he took it, slowly, deliberately, like he was proving a point. He touched me like he owned me, and I hated him for it. But what scared me even more was how my body reacted. I kept telling myself I wasn't enjoying it, that the heat in my chest and the ache in my stomach weren't real. But the longer it went on, the harder it was to believe my own lies. After it was over, I felt sick. Zaden lay back on his bed, completely satisfied, while I scrambled to get dressed. I couldn't even look at him. I just wanted to get out of there, to scrub every inch of my skin and pretend it hadn't happened. But before I could reach the door, his voice stopped me. We're not done. I froze. What do you mean? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He sat up, that smirk back on his face. You didn't really think this was a one-time thing, did you? My stomach dropped. Zaden, no, I can't. You can, he cut me off, and you will, unless you want Dad to see that video. I wanted to scream, to slap him, to run, but I couldn't, because he was right. The days that followed were torture. I avoided him as much as I could, but it didn't matter. He always found a way to corner me, to remind me that he was in control. It wasn't just the threats, either. It was the way he looked at me, like he knew I couldn't stop him. Like he owned me now. And the worst part? I started to believe it. I hated myself for what I'd done, for what I was still doing. But every time he touched me, my body betrayed me. I wanted to fight it, but I couldn't. And that terrified me. I couldn't talk to Devon about it. I couldn't talk to anyone. Devon had pulled away after Zaden caught us, and I didn't blame him. I could see the guilt eating him up, But at least he wasn't trapped the way I was. I was alone, stuck in this endless cycle of shame and fear and something else. Something darker. Something I didn't want to name. Zaden wasn't satisfied with just having control over me. He wanted more. And every time he got it, I felt myself slipping further away from who I used to be. But as much as I hated him, I couldn't stop. And that scared me more than anything. I don't know when it changed. At first, I did what Zaden wanted because I had to, because I was terrified of what would happen if I didn't. But somewhere along the way, the lines blurred. I still hated him, hated the way he looked at me like I was something he owned. But I couldn't deny what his touch did to me, and that terrified me more than anything. It wasn't just the fear of being exposed anymore. It was the fear of what I was becoming. Zaden stopped pretending to be subtle. He didn't care if Devon was upstairs or if Grant might come home early. He'd corner me in the hallway, his hands on my waist, his mouth brushing against my neck while I froze, too scared to push him away. And when we were alone, he didn't hold back. It wasn't quick anymore. It wasn't rushed. It was deliberate, like he was testing how far he could push me before I snapped. The worst part? I didn't snap. I gave in. The nights were the hardest. Grant would kiss me goodnight, his lips barely grazing mine, and I'd lie there staring at the ceiling, replaying everything Zaden had done to me earlier that day. I told myself I hated it, that I hated him. But my body said something else, and that scared me more than anything. Devon started noticing. I could feel his eyes on me whenever Zaden and I were in the same room. He didn't say anything at first, but the tension was impossible to ignore. I tried to act normal, but it was pointless. One night, after Zaden brushed past me in the kitchen, Devon cornered me in the hallway. "What's going on with you two?" he asked, his voice low but sharp. "Nothing," I lied. Too fast. Too obvious. Devon stepped closer. "Don't lie to me, Mia. I see the way he looks at you, the way you avoid looking at him." "You're imagining things," I said, forcing a laugh that sounded fake even to my own ears. "He's just being Zaden." "No, he's not," Devon snapped. "And you're not acting like yourself." I felt my throat tighten. I wanted to tell him the truth, but how could I? How could I admit what I'd let happen? "You're wrong," I said, pushing past him before he could see the panic in my eyes. But I knew Devon wouldn't let it go. And then there was Grant. It started small. Little comments here and there, questions about why I seemed distracted or why Zaden was suddenly spending so much time at home. "You and Zaden getting along better these days?" he asked one night while we were getting ready for bed. "What do you mean?" I tried to sound casual, but my voice cracked just enough to make his eyes narrow. "I don't know, you just seem closer lately." I forced a laugh. "You're imagining things." But the look on his face said he wasn't convinced. Zaden didn't care. If anything, knowing people were starting to notice seemed to excite him. He started pushing even harder, touching me in places he shouldn't when Grant was in the next room, whispering things in my ear that made my skin crawl but also sent shivers down my spine. I wanted to stop. I wanted to say no. But I didn't. I hated myself more and more every day. I hated the way Zaden made me feel. I hated the guilt that came every time Grant touched me. I hated the way Devon looked at me, like he knew I was falling apart but couldn't figure out why. But most of all, I hated the part of me that didn't want it to end. I couldn't avoid Devon anymore. I tried, God knows I tried, but he wouldn't let it go. The way he looked at me every time Zaden came into the room was unbearable. He knew something was wrong, and I knew it was only a matter of time before he cornered me. When it finally happened, I was in the laundry room, folding towels and trying to keep my hands from shaking. Devon came in without knocking, shutting the door behind him. My stomach dropped the second I saw the look on his face. "We need to talk." I swallowed hard. "Devon, not now." "Now," he cut me off, stepping closer. "What the hell is going on between you and Zaden?" I froze. My heart was pounding so hard I thought he'd hear it. "Nothing," I said, forcing the word out, even though it felt like poison on my tongue. "Don't lie to me." His voice was sharp, louder than I'd ever heard it before. I see the way he looks at you, the way you flinch whenever he's near you. You think I haven't noticed? Devon, please. Just tell me the truth. And that's when I broke. I sank down onto the dryer, my hands covering my face as the tears spilled over. He knows, I whispered. He saw us. He has a video. Devon didn't move. For a second, it was so quiet I could hear the hum of the dryer underneath me. What? His voice was low now. Dangerous. He saw us, I repeated. And now he's using it to... I couldn't finish the sentence. I didn't have to. Devon's face shifted. Shock, rage, disgust. It was all there. But under it, something else. Something worse. Guilt. You're telling me he's been blackmailing you? Devon asked, his voice shaking. And you just... what? Went along with it? I didn't have a choice, I snapped, the words coming out sharper than I meant. You don't get it, Devon. He's got that video, and if Grant sees it... This is my fault. Devon's voice was barely above a whisper, but it hit me like a slap. No, I said quickly. No, Devon. Yes, it is. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the tiny room like he couldn't stand still. I started this. I dragged you into this. And now he's using it to... He stopped, his fists clenched. I'll kill him. No, I said, standing up so fast the dryer rattled behind me. You can't do anything. If you make him angry, he'll... I don't care, Devon snapped. I won't let him keep doing this to you. And then what? I shot back. You think this ends if you beat him up? You think he doesn't have that video saved somewhere? Devon stared at me, breathing hard, and I knew the answer before he said it. We're trapped, Devon, I whispered. Both of us. That night, I sat in bed staring at Grant while he slept. I thought about telling him everything, about the affair, about Zaden, about all of it. Maybe he'd forgive me. Maybe he wouldn't. But at least the secret would be out. At least I wouldn't have to carry it anymore. But then I thought about Zaden's video, about what Grant would see, about the way he'd look at me afterward. And I couldn't do it. I wasn't ready to lose everything. Devon tried to act normal the next day, but I could see it eating him up. The guilt, the anger, the helplessness. And every time Zaden walked into the room, the tension grew thicker. I knew it was only a matter of time before it exploded. I just didn't know when. The sound of Grant's car pulling into the driveway nearly stopped my heart. He wasn't supposed to be home yet. He told me he had a late meeting. Hours from now. But there he was. His keys jingling at the front door, his footsteps echoing in the hallway. I froze, my pulse hammering in my ears. Zaden was still in the house. Upstairs. And the way things had been going lately, I had no idea what he might do. What if he said something? What if he showed Grant the video? What if everything came crashing down right here, right now? Mia! Grant's voice boomed from the front door. You here? I jumped, almost knocking over the glass of water I'd been holding. My voice came out shakier than I wanted. Yeah, I'm here. I forced myself to walk toward him, wiping my palms on my jeans. He was already in the kitchen, setting his keys on the counter and loosening his tie. He looked tired, completely unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. You're home early, I said, trying to sound casual. Meeting got cancelled, he replied, reaching into the fridge for a beer. Figured I'd come home and spend some time with my wife for once. Thought you'd like that. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I forced a smile, but I could feel my hands trembling. I hated how normal he sounded, how easy this was for him, like we were just another happy couple winding down after a long day. But I couldn't stop thinking about Zaden. Grant's voice pulled me back. Where's Zaden? I froze. Upstairs, I think, I said quickly, working on something for school. Grant nodded, taking a long sip of his beer. But then he gave me that look, the one that made my skin crawl. You've been acting strange lately, he said, his tone shifting. Distant, distracted. Is there something you're not telling me? My throat tightened. I could feel the walls closing in. The urge to confess, to just let it all out and deal with the fallout, nearly consumed me. But before I could say anything, Zaden appeared in the doorway. "Hey, Dad." Zaden's voice was casual, too casual. But his eyes locked on mine and I felt it. That pull, that unspoken threat. My stomach twisted. "Hey, kid," Grant said, ruffling his hair. "You surviving senior year?" "Barely," Zaden joked, but his eyes never left mine. "Guess it's all about managing your stress, right, Mia?" My breath caught in my throat. He was pushing me, daring me to react, and I couldn't. Not with Grant standing right there. I forced a laugh, but my hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the edge of the counter to steady myself. "Stress management," I muttered. "Yeah, something like that." Zaden didn't break eye contact, not even when Grant turned away to grab another beer. And in that moment I knew. He wasn't done with me, not even close. Later that night, after Grant had fallen asleep, I stood in the bathroom staring at my reflection in the mirror. I didn't recognize the woman looking back at me. Her eyes were hollow, her face pale, her lips slightly parted like she wanted to scream but couldn't. I touched the glass, my fingers trembling. I wanted to hate her for everything she'd done, for everything she'd let happen. But all I felt was emptiness. "How did this happen?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. But there was no answer, just silence, and the weight of everything I'd lost. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know if I can fix it, and that's why I'm sharing my story with you. Maybe someone out there has an answer, something I haven't thought of. Maybe you can help me see a way out of this mess I've made before it's too late. So please, if you have advice, if you've been in a situation like this or know someone who has, I want to hear from you. And if nothing else, let this be a warning. Loneliness can push you to places you never thought you'd go. Don't let yourself get lost like I did. Don't let your world fall apart before you realize what's happening. Because once you cross that line, there's no going back. Thank you for listening. Please share your thoughts. Like this video if you found it helpful, and subscribe for more. I need to know I'm not alone.